Grandpa stopped mid-bite. The whole Thanksgiving table went quiet, except for Vanessa's youngest kicking the leg of his chair. "Wait," Grandpa Howard said, lowering his fork. "You pay your parents' rent." My throat closed. Dad wiped gravy from the corner of his mouth like this was nothing. "She's 22, Howard. Adults contribute." Mom nodded too quickly. "And Vanessa has 2 kids. She needs the help more." Vanessa stared down at her plate. I sat at the far end of the table in my black bakery shoes, the ones with flour still crusted around the soles from my shift that morning. My legs ached under the table. My hands were folded in my lap because I didn't know what to do with them. Grandpa looked from Dad to Mom, then back to me. "How much?" he asked. Dad let out a short laugh. "That's not really dinner conversation." "How much, Roxane?" I swallowed. 900. Vanessa's fork slipped against her plate. Grandpa's face changed so fast it scared me. Before that moment, Thanksgiving had been exactly what I expected. Loud, crowded, and somehow still arranged around Vanessa's problems. She had arrived late with her 2 boys, dropped their coats on the couch, and immediately told Mom that winter clothes were insane this year. Mom didn't answer Vanessa. She looked at me. Not a kind look, not a question, just that familiar silent pressure that meant I was supposed to offer before anyone had to ask. I lowered my fork because I already knew where it was going. Dad leaned back in his chair and said, "Roxane can cover a little extra this month. She doesn't have any real bills besides her room downstairs." My room downstairs. He always said it like it was an apartment. It was half of an unfinished basement with a curtain stretched between my bed and boxes of Christmas decorations. I bought my own groceries, paid my own phone bill, washed my clothes after everyone else was done, and still handed over $900 every month to sleep under the house I grew up in. Grandpa had been quiet until then. Now he pushed back his chair. "Why," he asked slowly, "is my granddaughter paying rent to live in this house?" Dad waved his hand. "Because Vanessa has 2 kids." Mom added, "Roxane is young and single. She can help instead of acting like life is hard." I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. Grandpa set his fork down with a small, sharp clink. "How long has this been going on?" Dad's smile disappeared. "Howard, don't start." Grandpa didn't look at him. He looked at me. And when I whispered, "Since I turned 21, the color drained from his face. "Before we continue, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy the story. Also, drop a comment with your location and local time. I always love hearing where you're listening from." Grandpa didn't raise his voice. That was what made everyone nervous. He picked up the dessert plates from the sideboard and said, "Roxane, come help me in the kitchen." Mom's eyes flicked to Dad. Dad said, "She can sit down, we're eating." Grandpa smiled without warmth. "It wasn't a request for you, Paul." My chair scraped against the floor when I stood. Vanessa watched me like I was doing something wrong, but she didn't say anything. Her boys were arguing over a roll. Mom was suddenly very interested in refilling glasses, and Dad's jaw kept moving like he was chewing words he couldn't spit out yet. In the kitchen, the noise of the dining room softened behind us. Grandpa set the plates on the counter. "Tell me the truth." I looked at the floor. "It's not that bad." "Roxane." "I mean it," I said quickly. "I work enough hours. Dad says it teaches responsibility. Mom says it helps Vanessa until she gets back on her feet." Grandpa leaned against the sink and folded his arms. "She moved back in 8 months ago," I added. "Her daycare costs got bad, and then her car needed work. At first, Mom and Dad only asked me for 400. Then it became 6. When Vanessa came back with the boys, Dad said 900 was still cheaper than moving out." Grandpa's eyes narrowed. "Do you buy your own food?" I nodded. "Phone?" "Yes." "Gas, clothes, medicine?" "Yes." "And they still charge you 900 to sleep in the basement." I rubbed my thumb against the side of my palm. "It's not like they force me." He waited. I hated that waiting. It made the excuses sound thin before I even said them. I tried to leave, I admitted. Twice. But every time I got close, something happened. Dad's truck needed tires. Mom said the electric bill doubled. Vanessa needed money for the boys. And when I said I couldn't, Mom cried and asked when I became so selfish. Grandpa turned his head toward the dining room. Did you ever get anything from the credit union downtown? I blinked. What? Letters, statements, anything with your name on it. No. He stood very still. I tried to laugh, but it came out wrong. I don't really check the mail. Mom brings it in. If something's mine, she puts it on the basement stairs. Grandpa's hand closed around one of the dessert plates so tightly his knuckles paled. Are you absolutely sure? Yes, why? Before he could answer, Mom appeared in the doorway. Her smile was stretched too wide. What are you two whispering about? Grandpa took the plate from my hands, stepped around her, and walked straight toward the front hall mail cabinet. Grandpa opened the mail cabinet so hard the little brass knob cracked against the wall. Mom rushed after him. Howard, stop, that is private. Dad's chair scraped in the dining room. What are you doing? He snapped. Grandpa didn't answer. He pulled out a stack of appliance manuals, old insurance folders, and folded envelopes tied together with a rubber band. Vanessa stood near the dining room entrance with one hand on her youngest son's shoulder. Roxane, just tell him it's fine. I looked at her. I didn't know my mail was in there. That changed the room. Grandpa looked back at me. Have you ever been allowed to check this cabinet yourself? My mouth went dry. No. Dad stepped forward. Allowed. She makes it sound like a prison. We bring the mail in like normal people. Grandpa flipped through the stack. Then, why are there envelopes here with her name on them? Mom's face tightened. He pulled 2 envelopes free. Both had my full name, printed across the front. Roxane Miller. Both were from the credit union downtown. One had already been opened. The other was still sealed. Mom reached for them. That's junk mail. Grandpa lifted them above her hand. Junk mail hidden behind tax folders. Dad pointed toward the table. Enough. Roxane's rent is a family matter. You don't get to come into my house and embarrass us on Thanksgiving. Grandpa turned slowly. Your house. Dad's voice hardened. Yes, my house. And in my house, adults help. Vanessa has children, Roxane doesn't. That means Roxane can contribute. Vanessa's face went pink. She looked at me, then at Dad. I thought she knew. I stared at her. Knew what? Vanessa shifted her youngest closer to her hip. That some of the rent was helping with daycare, and my car payments. Mom said you were okay with it because you had fewer responsibilities. The words landed colder than shouting. I had been waking up before sunrise, icing cupcakes with swollen fingers, counting every dollar before payday, while Vanessa's car sat in the driveway with a full tank and her boys slept in the upstairs bedrooms. You thought I knew, I asked. Vanessa didn't answer. Grandpa slid his finger under the flap of the opened envelope and unfolded the paper inside. His eyes moved over the first line. Then he stopped. The room seemed to shrink around him. He looked at Dad. How long, Grandpa asked, have you known about this account? Dad's mouth opened, then closed. Mom whispered, Howard, not here. Grandpa turned to me, holding the paper like it weighed more than the whole cabinet. Sweetheart, he said, this money was supposed to get you out. I couldn't move. Grandpa's words sat in the middle of the room like a chair had been knocked over. This money was supposed to get you out. Dad clapped his hands once, sharp enough that Vanessa's youngest jumped. All right, he said. Everybody back to the table. Dinner is getting cold and this conversation is over. Grandpa didn't move. Dad pointed toward the dining room. Howard. Grandpa walked past him and placed the opened envelope flat on the Thanksgiving table, right between the cranberry sauce and the bowl of mashed potatoes. My name was on the page. The credit union logo was at the top, and beneath it was a balance, notice I had never seen before. Mom came up behind me. Roxane, don't let him upset you. I looked at the paper instead of her. Uncle Mark arrived at that exact moment, carrying a grocery store pumpkin pie in one hand and his coat over his arm. He stopped in the entryway. What did I walk into? No one answered. Grandpa tapped the paper once. Paul and Denise have been hiding Roxane's mail. Dad barked out a laugh. That is not what's happening. Grandpa looked at me. After your grandmother died, I arranged for money to be set aside for you. You were supposed to receive the account information when you turned 21. I thought maybe you were waiting to use it. I asked your mother months ago. Mom's lips parted. Grandpa's eyes stayed on me. She told me you were thinking it over. My stomach twisted. I remembered every apartment listing I had saved on my phone. Every time Dad had suddenly needed help. Every time Mom had stood in my basement doorway and said, "Family doesn't abandon family." Vanessa folded her arms. I never asked where the money came from. I turned to her. Did you ever wonder why I was the only one sleeping downstairs and still paying the most? She looked away again. Dad's face reddened. You're all twisting this. Roxane would have blown that money and abandoned the family. We were trying to teach her. He stopped too late. The room went dead silent. Grandpa slowly lifted his head. So you knew. Dad's shoulders stiffened. Mom grabbed the back of a dining chair. Paul. But it was already out. They knew. They knew there was money with my name on it. They knew I could have left. And instead of telling me, they raised my rent until leaving felt impossible. Grandpa folded the paper carefully and handed it to me. Get your coat, he said. You're staying with me tonight. First thing the next business day, we're going to the credit union. For the first time all evening, I moved without looking at my parents for permission. I turned toward the hall. Mom stepped in front of the door. Roxane, she said, her voice tight, you are not walking out of this house because your grandfather is confused. Before she could say another word, Uncle Mark set the pumpkin pie on the nearest table and looked straight at her. Denise, he said, tell him about the withdrawals. Mom's hand slid off the doorframe. Nobody moved. Grandpa turned toward Uncle Mark. What withdrawals? Dad pointed at Mark. Stay out of this. Mark didn't even look at him. I tried to stay out of it. I thought Roxane knew. My fingers tightened around the envelope Grandpa had handed me. Knew what? I asked. Mom whispered, Mark, please. But Uncle Mark shook his head. No, not after hearing all this. He stepped farther into the dining room, still wearing his coat, his face pale under the ceiling light. A few months ago, he said, I was in Paul's garage helping him replace that shelf by the freezer. Denise came out with her phone and they were talking about money. Vanessa's car payment was due. Paul said they could pull it from Roxane's rent. Vanessa's mouth opened. Mark looked at her. You were inside with the kids. I don't know what you were told, but I heard him say it. Dad slammed his palm on the table. That's enough. The plates jumped. Gravy sloshed over the rim of the boat. Grandpa didn't flinch. No, Grandpa said. It is not enough, not yet. Mom's eyes were shiny now, but not soft. She looked cornered. We did what we had to do. I stared at her. What you had to do? She turned to me like she expected me to understand. Vanessa had children, Roxane, 2 little boys. You had income. You had no dependents. We were keeping this family from falling apart. I looked toward the basement door. The family didn't fall apart because I was holding it up from downstairs. That was the first thing I said all night that made Mom stop. Grandpa opened the envelope again and laid the page flat beside my plate. This account was not a mystery, he said. After your grandmother died, I set money aside for Roxane. I told you both exactly what it was for. When she turned 21, she was supposed to receive access information from the credit union, a place to live, a reliable car, school if she wanted it, a start. Dad crossed his arms. It wasn't that much. Grandpa's eyes cut to him. It was enough. The room got quiet around that. Enough. Enough for first month's rent. Enough for a security deposit. Enough for a used couch, a bed frame, dishes that didn't come from someone else's cabinet. Enough for me to stop checking apartment listings like they were pictures of another country. I looked down at the balance notice. My name was there. Not Mom's. Not Dad's. Mine. Grandpa continued, his voice controlled. You could not take it directly, so you took everything around it. You opened her mail. You kept the account information from her. You told me she was thinking things over when she did not even know it existed. Mom pressed her lips together. Dad said she wasn't ready. Grandpa pointed at my bakery shoes under the table. She was ready enough to work double shifts, ready enough to pay you $900 a month, ready enough to buy her own food, ready enough to help pay for a car she does not drive and daycare for children she did not have. Vanessa sat down slowly, like her knees had weakened. I didn't know it was like that, she said. I looked at her. You knew I was in the basement. She swallowed. You knew I worked mornings on holidays. Her eyes dropped. You knew Mom looked at me every time you needed money. Vanessa covered her mouth, but she didn't argue. Dad shoved his chair back. So now I'm the villain because I expected my adult daughter to contribute. No, I said. Everyone looked at me. My voice shook, but I kept going. You're the villain because you made sure I could never contribute enough to leave. Dad's face went red again. Watch your mouth. Grandpa stepped between us before Dad could move closer. She is watching it, Grandpa said. For the first time tonight, she is using it. Mom started crying then. Not loud, not dramatic, just enough to fill the silence with small broken sounds. Usually, that sound would have pulled me across the room. Usually, I would have apologized even when I didn't know what for. I would have said it was fine. I would have told Grandpa to stop. I would have made myself smaller so Mom could be comfortable again. This time, I stayed still. I held the envelope against my chest and asked the question that had been forming since Grandpa found my name in that cabinet. How long were you planning to keep me in the basement? Mom's crying stopped. Dad looked away. Vanessa stared at the floor. Nobody answered. And somehow, the silence told me more than any confession could have. Grandpa picked up his coat from the back of the chair. Roxane, get your things. Mom wiped her face. She lives here. Not tonight, Grandpa said. Dad tried one more time. You're making a huge mistake, Roxane. You walk out that door, don't expect to come crawling back. I waited for the old fear to hit me. It didn't. Maybe because Grandpa was standing beside me. Maybe because Uncle Mark was already taking pictures of the envelopes on the table. Maybe because, for the first time, everyone had seen the truth before my parents could fold it back into a version where I was selfish and they were struggling. I walked downstairs. The basement smelled like detergent, cardboard, and the old space heater I used on cold nights. My bed was made because I always made it before work. My grocery bag of snacks was tucked under the folding table so Vanessa's boys wouldn't eat them. My work uniform hung from a pipe near the laundry area. I packed one duffel bag. Jeans, socks, my charger, the notebook where I tracked every payment I sent Dad, screenshots of bank transfers, the apartment listings I had printed and hidden between old textbooks. When I came back upstairs, Uncle Mark was photographing the rent records from my phone. Dad said, "You're all acting like this is court." Mark lowered the phone. "No, we're acting like Roxane might need proof." Mom's face crumpled again, but I still didn't move toward her. Grandpa opened the front door. Cold November air swept into the house, cutting through the smell of turkey and cinnamon candles. Vanessa stood near the stairs with her arms around herself. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. I paused. I believed that she was ashamed. I believed that she had not known every detail. But I also knew she had eaten at that table while I came home exhausted. She had let Mom say I had no real bills. She had accepted help without asking why the person giving it had less than everyone else. So I only said, I hope you figure out what help really costs. Then I walked out. Grandpa drove me to his house that night. Neither of us said much on the ride. He kept both hands on the wheel. I kept the envelope in my lap and watched the reflection of passing streetlights slide across the window. The next business day, Grandpa took me to the credit union. The woman behind the desk checked my ID, looked up the account, and asked if I wanted my contact information updated. Grandpa sat beside me, quiet, letting me answer for myself. Yes, I said, only mine. She removed my parents' phone number, removed their address as the mailing contact, added my email, added my cell, printed copies of everything. The account had not been drained. My parents had not been able to legally take the money directly, but they had blocked every path leading to it. And now the path was open. Uncle Mark sent me the photos from Thanksgiving and saved copies of my rent transfer history. Grandpa told Dad that any more contact about money needed to be in writing. When Dad texted that I still owed rent for the month, Grandpa helped me answer with one sentence. I no longer live there. There was no lease. No written agreement. No basement room worth $900. And no daughter left to intimidate. The fallout moved through the family faster than Mom could control it. Aunt Linda called Grandpa first. Then my cousin texted me that she had heard something happened at Thanksgiving. By the end of the week, nobody was asking why I left. They were asking why my parents had charged me almost $1,000 a month while hiding mail with my name on it. Dad and Mom lost the money immediately. $900 vanished from their monthly budget because I was no longer there to send it. Vanessa had to apply for childcare assistance, call about payment plans, and start looking for work she could do around the boys' school schedule. Her car payment was no longer my invisible responsibility. Mom sent me one long message saying I had embarrassed the family. I read it once. Then I looked around my studio apartment. It was tiny. The kitchen and living room were almost the same room. My couch came from a thrift store. My dishes didn't match. The mattress sat on a second-hand bed frame Grandpa helped me tighten with a screwdriver from his glove box. But every key on the ring was mine. Nobody came down the stairs to tell me what I owed. Nobody opened my mail. Nobody looked at me across a dinner table and silently spent my paycheck. A week after I moved in, Grandpa came over with one last box from his garage. He said it was apartment stuff, but when I opened it, the first thing I saw was a fork wrapped in a Thanksgiving napkin. I stared at it, then looked up. Grandpa shrugged. Thought you might want the famous fork. For the first time in days, I laughed. Not because everything was fixed. It was. My relationship with my parents was cracked in a way that would not simply glue back together. Vanessa and I spoke once, awkwardly, and she apologized again, but I told her forgiveness would take longer than one phone call. Dad stopped texting when I stopped answering. Mom's messages got shorter when guilt stopped working. But my life was finally quiet in a way that belonged to me. That night, I put the fork in the top drawer of my little kitchen. Then I shut the drawer, locked my apartment door, and sat on my own bed under my own roof. That Thanksgiving, Grandpa did not just ask why I was paying rent. He asked the question that gave my life back.